Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be discussing the new Jewish holidays celebrated by Israel and asking what spiritual significance do they have for the Jewish people in the modern era. Well, welcome to the programme, and my guest today is all the way from North London, and he is Rabbi Andrew Shaw, the Chief Executive of Mizrachi UK. Andrew, an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
And it's always good to have a rabbi on the programme as well, so expecting a philosophical programme today.
Hopefully, I won't disappoint.
And Andrew, can you share with us your Jewish life and your family growing up in North London and your kind of Jewish experience from your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, I was a traditional upbringing in northwest London, part of sort of my local synagogue, very involved as a youngster in the youth movement there, B'nai Akiva. And I guess for me, being Jewish was very much part of my life. Even though I went to a non-Jewish secondary school, I very much was part of the Jewish society there and have felt no problem with wearing my kippah, my head covering in the school, and the school was incredibly respectful of the Jewish community there, and we had prayer services and festival celebrations within the non-Jewish school, and I always felt very much happy to be a Jew in a non-Jewish world to a certain extent, and then that carried on at university. But really the changing point for me was I spent a year in Israel in between finishing A-levels and starting my degree in engineering at Leeds University. And it was that year really that kind of inspired me to realise the beauty and the depth in the Jewish tradition. And then when I got to university, I was struck that so many of my friends had a very weak connection Jewishly, but yet they saw me as somebody who was like them, meaning I was a student at university, I was a modern, student, yet I had a knowledge and an understanding of Judaism they didn't have. And I found myself many evenings just having discussions about Judaism with people, organising events, and it kind of made me realise, maybe this is something I want to do as a career in terms of education for the Jewish community. And thus, after I did a year for UJS, which is the Union of Jewish Students, in the mid-90s, I decided to not become an accountant, but to become a rabbi instead, and spent 5 years training in Israel and America, and then got what's called smicha and became a rabbi working here in the UK, and have done now for the last 18 years.
Fabulous. So can you give us a little bit of an insight? I mean, what training is involved to train to be a rabbi and be a part of the...
So rabbinic training basically is we have to know how to give over Jewish law. So like any other, profession, there's training, there's various texts we have to learn. The major text, the basis of Jewish law, is called the Shulchan Aruch, the set table, which was written by Rav Yosef Cairo in the Middle Ages and 16th century in Israel. And it forms the basis it's a summation of all Jewish law up to that point, and it's used the basis for all discussions from that point onwards. So our job is basically to learn many different areas to do with the Sabbath, the festivals, prayer services, in order just to have the all-round knowledge when you come to a community or come to a school or wherever it is, you can answer questions about Judaism from whoever asks you, and you sit exams and you get given at the end, you pass your exams and you get given the title of rabbi.
Excellent, excellent. And, today you're here to represent Mizrachi UK. Can you tell us about the organisation and its remit?
So Mizrachi is an organisation that basically began at the turn of the 20th century. The Zionist movement really took off in the late 19th century with Theodor Herzl and other figures that really started to drive the Jewish people back to their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. And there was really a discussion amongst the community there, they were called the Zionist organizations, about what role Judaism should play in that model. A lot of the early Zionists were secular Jews. And therefore they kind of saw the return to Israel as a kind of a breaking away from the old world and sort of forming a new kind of new Jew agriculturally and sort of physically. There were others who felt that actually no, there was no need to compromise. You could very much see the return to Zion as part of our religious imperative. But we should still join with the Zionist mission, even if the Zionist mission at the moment is a more secular nature. And therefore, a rabbi, Ravinus, came up in 1902 with the formation of Mizrachi, which stands in Hebrew for Merkaz Ruchani, which means the center of spirituality. And that was in two forms. One is the Torah, being the Bible, being the center of spirituality, and the other being Israel as the center of spirituality. So we combined those two things, and Mizrachi began as a movement to really drive a return to Zion through a religious and return to God at the same time. And therefore, when Israel was eventually declared in 1948, a lot of the rules, a lot of the things today that we see in Israel, like the army is kosher, buses don't run on the Sabbath, you know, these sort of things, were because of the influence of the Mizrachi had on the wider government. And in fact, the beautiful, you can see it on newsreel, when David Ben-Gurion, who was the first Prime Minister of the State of Israel, tremendous hero of the Jewish people, when he read out the statement in 1948 that, you know, I declare the State of Israel, there was, straight after that, you see a man stand up next to him and recite the blessing of Shechianu. And Shechianu is the blessing we recite when we come to a significant part of our lives, whether it's a festival or a certain occasion. And therefore, the return of the Jewish people after 2,000 years was definitely merited that blessing. But Ben-Gurion felt he, as a secular Jew, did not have the ability to deliver that blessing for the Jewish people. So he asked the rabbi next to him, who was the rabbi who was the head of the Mizrachi movement, to say that blessing. So we were there right front and center at the creation of the State of Israel by saying the blessing to God of thank you for bringing us back and bringing us to this miraculous day.
That's an amazing story. And also, can you share with us what religious Zionism is? I mean, you explained pretty much in your last question about the history of religious Zionism and its connection to the re-establishment of the State of Israel and the build-up to the 14th of May 1948, when Israel declared independence. But can you define for us what religious Zionism is and its impact upon those who advocate support for religious practice and Zionism?
So it's a complex question, obviously, and it can be, you know, lots of different classes on just that one topic. But just to kind of focus on one area, I think, which I think will make it a bit clearer. Every morning we pray in Jewish prayers, the Amidah prayer. That's the central prayer of our services in the morning, evening, and night. And one of those prayers, we talk about that God should bring us back from the four corners of the earth. Another blessing is that he should return us to Jerusalem. These are major prayers we have said every day for the last 2,500 years since they were first formulated in ancient time. And therefore, as a religious Zionist, we very much see that God answered our call, that God did bring us back to the land of Israel. He did bring us back from the four corners of the earth to the land of Israel. And therefore, for us, these events of 48, of 67, which we're going to talk about in terms of the festivals that now come to celebrate them, we see these not simply as national days, but as godly days, of days that we thank God for bringing us back, that we say prayers to God to say thank you for returning us to our land. Yes, it's a day of celebration and family and barbecues, of course, but underpinning all of that is a realization that God has brought us back, and therefore we recognize, not just as Zionists, but as religious Zionists, which understand as well that the Torah, the laws, the various practices we have to do should be encouraged to be done as well as part of the whole Zionist enterprise, and something for the whole Jewish people to embrace, not just a small segment.
Excellent. So let's have a look now at this excellent video produced by World Mizrachi that looks at religious Zionism in the 21st century.
There is a religious Zionist awakening taking place throughout Israel. You can see it in every sphere of life. In the IDF, more than half of the officers are now wearing kippot, and never before have there been so many religious officers holding the highest ranks of the army. Religious Zionist pioneers saw it as a national imperative to settle the land of Israel, and the results of their motivation, self-sacrifice, and ideology can be felt not only in the settlements of Judea and Samaria, Ben Ayarot Pituach development cities all over the periphery of Israel, illuminating and uplifting some of the most challenged in Israeli society. The school system and public service across the country are all being infused and inspired with the spirit of religious Zionism. In the Knesset, there have never been so many knitted kippot in such powerful positions of influence, and the religious Zionist party, the Bayit Yehudi, has transformed itself, opening its doors to Jews of all backgrounds who identify with the values of our movement. This inclusive and powerful message of Torah Eretz Yisrael is catching on like wildfire across the country, and we believe that it is high time to bring this message to the global Jewish community in the broadest and most impactful way. The re-energized World Mizrachi movement led by the new CEO, Rav Doron Perez, is taking the message of Ki Mitzion Tetzeh Torah to the next level. Our affiliates, World Bnei Akiva, Torah Mitzion, Soul Train, and Manigut Toranit of Kolel Eretz Chemda, along with our partners, the World Zionist Organization, Bat Ami, Mechon Amiel Strauss, and Lavi Olami, each add their unique light, together forming the flame of religious Zionism, which is spreading across the globe. World Mizrachi rabbis Doron Perez and Jeremy Gimpel have traveled across America and Canada, the UK, South Africa, and Australia to strengthen and revitalize our branches. In Great Britain, World Mizrachi was instrumental in re-establishing a new Mizrachi UK based in London, already having a major impact on UK Jewry. In Israel, Mizrachi is hosting many Shlichut conferences, raising the profile of Shlichut across the country, enlisting major Rabbanim, Yeshivot, and Midrashot to the cause. Mizrachi is bringing Shlichut to the forefront of Jewish consciousness in Israel for the next generation. With the call of Tzav HaSha'ah, Mizrachi has hosted hundreds of potential Shlichim and already seen a major rise in appropriate candidates for Shlichut around the world. World Mizrachi is disseminating inspiring and relevant educational content across the Jewish world. One amazing example has been our partnership with Koren Publishers in publishing the first ever Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim Machzor in the English language, including profound commentaries and articles from some of the Jewish world's leading religious thinkers. This Koren Mizrachi publication was an immediate bestseller, adding deep spiritual appreciation to the critical role of the State of Israel in Jewish destiny today. Raising the bar in leadership development, World Mizrachi is revolutionizing recruitment of the next generation of global rabbinic and educational leaders to serve diaspora Jewry. Through pinpoint searches in Israel and unique partnerships with local diaspora communities, we have built a cadre of young and powerful educators, all fluent in English and ready to serve and to lead. Under the directorship of Rav Hillel Van Leeuwen, Shalhevet already has over 25 educators, both men and women in training. World Mizrachi is redefining the way Shlichim are being recruited, trained, and dispatched to communities around the world. Since the beginning of modern Zionism, diaspora Jewry supported life in Israel. It is now time for Jewish life in Israel to inspire, strengthen, and uplift our diaspora communities. World Mizrachi is leading the way. Am Yisrael, Be'eretz Yisrael, Al Pi Torat Yisrael.
And that gives you an excellent insight into the incredible work carried out by Mizrachi throughout the world, impacting Jewish communities across the globe. Andrew, very impressive video, very, very impressive. And it's good to see in the video as well. What is the challenge today for, say, for example, the British Jewish community? Because we see, sadly, a rise of Jew hatred around the world. We see the emergence of daily scandals regarding anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and Her Majesty's opposition, so they could form the next government. We also see horrendous anti-Semitism across the continent, in Europe as well. In light of this, what do you think the future is for the British Jewish community? Is it in Israel, or is it here, and to really power through education and the importance of Jewishness to the Jewish community?
Look, I think we do live in worrying times. I mean, I never thought that I would, in my lifetime, have to stand in Parliament Square holding a banner saying enough is enough, to complain about what was happening in the Labour Party. And I think it's got even worse since we had that protest a year ago. I mean, the latest data shows that 42% of Jews would leave the country if Labour came to power under Jeremy Corbyn, which I think is it's worrying. But at the same time, we've always believed that Israel is a natural home for the Jewish people. I mean, it now has over 6.5 million Jews now live in Israel. They've returned there from all across the globe. And many British Jews have made aliyah, which is the word, to go to Israel. So we see, obviously, the future of the Jewish people is in Israel, but we also hope it's also in the diaspora. Because we want people to move to Israel, but for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons. I mean, not because they feel they have to flee where they're living. I mean, certainly many sort of the aliyot that came from Yemen and came from the Middle East, they had to come because they were being persecuted and tormented by the Arab countries then back in the 1940s and 50s, so they had to flee. We'd like to think, and also France, a lot of Jews in France have made aliyah because of what's happening, the rise in anti-Semitism in France. The UK, we haven't seen that yet. I hope we don't see that. I hope people continue to make aliyah for positive reasons, for their family, for their community, for their career, and just because they want to be part of the Jewish story, but not because they feel they have to flee anti-Semitism. But again, we live in confusing times.
Absolutely. And the situation facing Anglo Jewry is very different from that of the States,
yes.
With the Jewish community in America almost being absorbed into American society. So what do you say the biggest challenges are facing world Jewry right now?
It's a great question. I mean, you mentioned America. America is really in trouble Jewishly. It's been described to me by a major scholar over there as a Noah's Ark of orthodoxy in a sea of assimilation. The Orthodox community in America, both the more Hasidic or Orthodox community and the modern Orthodox community, are growing in leaps and bounds. There is hardly any assimilation into the wider society. You go away from that kind of tight-knit Orthodox world into the non-Orthodox world, and assimilation is reaching huge proportions, 60, 70, 80, 90%. And it really is a worry for American Jewry. Over here in the UK, it's slightly different. Thanks to the Chief Rabbi in United Synagogue, we have a much more traditional format here. So many Jews may not be observant or religious, but they belong to Orthodox communities. United Synagogue is the largest common organisation, 64 communities across mainly London, but under the Chief Rabbi, under his auspices, a further 50 or 60 synagogues, which make up the bulk of Jewish synagogue membership in the UK, which is positive for us because it means they're still affiliating to a vibrant core, but we still have to challenge to try and engage them and make them feel a part of it, because of course apathy is rife, especially amongst the young Jews, and we need to be vigilant to inspire them to connect to their heritage.
Absolutely, which is absolutely vital and particularly important in these days. Andrew, can you also, you're here on this programme really to discuss the Jewish people in the modern era,
yes.
And as we approach what is known as the Israeli holidays, which starts off with Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial Day, followed by Yom HaZakaron, the remembrance for those fallen soldiers in the IDF, followed then by Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel's Independence Day, and then the final one is Yom Yerushalayim Day. Can you share with us, because what's so significant about these, and I've only just really thought about this in the process of doing this programme, is that this is another indication that we're living in biblical times, because the ancient biblical holidays and feasts such as for example, Pesach or Passover, Yom Kippur, all have their roots in the Bible. And yet we have these now modern Jewish holidays celebrated around Israel's rebirth and renewal. Isn't this further indication that we are living in biblical times?
Absolutely. I mean, the phrase used in Jewish philosophy is we're living in Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, which means beginning of our redemption. We understand we're not living in the final redemption, but we believe the steps that have happened over the last 70 years post-Holocaust have really shown a remarkable transformation, as you said, a rebirth and renewal of the Jewish people. And it's to highlight what you said, which is remarkable. The Torah commands us, the Bible commands us as Jews to observe the major festivals, the three harvest festivals, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, or Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as they are in the Bible, and of course the two major festivals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those five are the biblical festivals observed across the Jewish world, have done for thousands of years. We did have two new days that came in during the rabbinic era. That was Purim in Persia and Hanukkah, which happened, of course, in Jerusalem in Israel, and they've been added. But the last time we added a day really was almost 2,000 years ago, and there's been nothing new. Since the exile of the Jewish people from Jerusalem in 70 CE, which was basically 200 years after the Hanukkah story, it was the beginning of a very long exile, and an exile that seemed to have no end. And then miraculously, in the last 70 years, suddenly, God has brought us back and has fulfilled the words of his servants, the prophets. And here we are celebrating these miraculous days. Of the 2 days we celebrate, of course, are Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. The days we commemorate are Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron. But they're all part of that modern story that really, if you think about it, took place in 22 years. I mean, Yom HaShoah, 1945 was the end of the Holocaust, the end of the single most horrendous destruction in world history, not only in Jewish history. And then within 22 years, that tattered, shattered nation had gone from almost being wiped out to reclaiming its ancestral home of Jerusalem and rebuilding the Third Commonwealth. It's a remarkable story in modern times.
Incredible. And you can only say it's really to the credit of the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and fulfilling his word. And particularly knowing that over 6 million Jewish people lost their lives on an industrial scale at the hands of the Nazis, and then only 3 short years between the destruction of European Jewry almost and then the rebirth of the nation of Israel can only really be described as an absolute miracle. But what role does Yom HaShoah play in Israel as part of its national psyche and characteristics?
So interesting. So Rav Soloveitchik, who is one of the great leaders of the 20th century, he wrote one of his seminal works, Kol Dodi Dofek, My Beloved Knocks, from the Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs in the Bible. He wrote that the state of Israel sort of heralded 6 miracles because of its creation. One of them he talks about is this sense of never again will Jewish blood be cheap. And I think one of the reasons why Yom HaShoah in Israel is called Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, the Day of Remembrance and of Strength, because the day we hold Yom HaShoah is the 28th of Nisan, which falls in the months of April normally, and that's the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I think it was important for Israel to say to themselves and to the world, we're not going to go like sheep to the slaughter anymore. We're going to be strong. We're going to fight back. And therefore, Yom HaShoah, for a lot of Israel, I think it's interesting. In Israel, for many years, no one spoke about it. It was only once Eichmann in the 60s was tried and people came out with the stories, because a lot of Holocaust survivors didn't want to talk about it. It was so horrific and so just mind-numbingly awful. They just couldn't speak. But once they heard the testimonies for the Eichmann trial, and then Israel changed and began to realize its necessity to be the sort of focus of Holocaust remembrance, but also of making sure never again, but also making sure that the people who have survived can thrive. Obviously, Yad Vashem was built in Israel, which of course is the focus of the Yom HaShoah commemorations. But for me also, one of the most beautiful links between Yom HaShoah and the modern state of Israel is a video you can watch on YouTube. It's a recording of the BBC of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. It's the most unbelievable video. With Reverend Leslie Hardman, a British rabbi, who actually married my parents, so there you go. He was the chaplain for the British Army, and he liberated Bergen-Belsen. And the BBC covers the liberation. And you can't see anything, but you can hear the broadcast. And in it, the BBC broadcaster says that people were still dying when they were there, but they'd gathered them together for an open service on a Friday night. The first time he said that they were able to pray in public without fear for 10 years. And you think about that, what must it have been like for 10 years? These Jews of Germany and Austria and Poland couldn't pray with any sense of safety, and here they were being allowed to. And the BBC broadcaster says they knew they were being recorded. They sort of gave all their strength, listen. And you expect what you're going to hear is the Friday night service, because it's Friday night. But what they're actually singing is the Hatikva.
Amazing.
And they're not singing the Hatikva we sing today in Israel, because the Hatikva we sing today was rewritten once we came back. They're singing the ancient version written in the 19th century. But it shows that these people didn't give up hope. These people still believed we're going to return. And it's just, for me, it's an amazing thing to realize when you're being liberated from Belsen, the first thing you want to tell the world is, we're going home.
Amazing. And
a lot of those people who were liberated eventually did go home and did form the the state of Israel in its early days.
Excellent. So let's see now how Yom HaShoah is remembered across Israel.
Israel has marked Holocaust Remembrance Day, an annual commemoration for the 6 million Jews killed by the Nazis in the Second World War. At 10 o'clock this morning, daily activities ground to a halt for 2 minutes nationwide to the sound of a lamenting siren. In a speech earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called for action against Syria following the suspected poison gas attack. And he invoked the lessons of World War II and the Holocaust to urge action against Iran, criticizing the nuclear deal it signed with world powers.
And yeah, that's a little bit of an insight into what it's like to be in Israel during Yom HaShoah. A very powerful and a very, very moving day. I suppose with the connection between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZakaron, the Remembrance Day for the fallen IDF soldiers and those caught up in terrorist attacks have been sadly killed, is the remarkable way that Israel just comes to a stop. To observe, is it a minute or 2 minute silence?
2 minute silence.
2 minute silence, and you know we see cars on one of Israel's motorways all just come to a stop, which is extraordinary, and it just shows something about the respect that Israel hold to those who have either perished in the most horrific way during the Holocaust, or those who have died defending the state of Israel. What links these two very remarkable and somber days in Israel?
I think certainly for Yom HaZikaron, which again, as you said, is Israel, Remembrance Day for the fallen soldiers and victims of terror. I think what is people maybe don't realise is over 24,000 people have died either defending the state or through victims of terror. For a country the size of Israel, that is a very small, very sort of small amount, but yet a huge percentage. And when I've been in Israel for Yom HaZikaron, I was there 2 years ago, and we went to a ceremony in the Gush Etzion area. Everyone knows somebody that died. Like, it's not like, you know, when someone dies in the British Army, you know, you're never going to meet a family. It's kind of like separate from you. In Israel, everybody knows somebody who was in the IDF. Everyone knows somebody who died in a terrorist attack. There's a real connection that maybe doesn't exist in other countries, so everybody feels a sense of togetherness about that day Yom HaZikaron, because they also realise, you know, if we didn't have an IDF, there would not be an Israel. As Golda Meir sort of once said, you know, the day will come, please God, when the Arabs will will love their children more than they hate ours. But until then, we have to keep on fighting. And Yom HaZikaron is a reminder of the price that we've had to pay to have a state of Israel. That we have to defend ourselves. Even today, I mean, last week, a rocket was fired into the heart of Israel from the Hamas terrorists. Thank God, miracle that no one was killed. They managed to get out of the house in time. But again, this is what we're facing on a daily basis. And Yom HaZikaron, therefore, is a day when Israel really comes together to say thank you to these people, these brave men and women who've, lost their lives, but also those who've been injured or those who are continually defending our country or Israel to keep it safe.
I read a book almost over 20 years ago now, which has really stayed with me. It's had a big influence on my life, and that was the Prime Minister's book, the Israeli Prime Minister, yes. Benjamin Netanyahu's book called Israel, A Place Among the Nations. And what he really describes is that the fact that for over 2,000 years, the Jewish people in exile were not allowed to be farmers and not allowed to be soldiers. There's some exceptions, of course. But when the Jewish people returned to Israel with the first wave of Aliyah, and then we saw the kibbutz movement start, which are the Jewish agricultural settlements in Israel, all across Israel, that as soon as they became farmers, then they had to become soldiers. So do you think there's a connection with being a soldier defending the land, knowing that this is a biblical land given to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and there is a kind of moral responsibility to defend what God has entrusted to those early pioneers?
I mean, the story of the early pioneers in the early 19th century, it was incredibly difficult what they were trying to do. They came to Israel with very little knowledge of how to farm or how to sort of grow an orchard or whatever it is. But at the same time, they had to make sure they could defend themselves against marauding gangs who were trying to stop them or kill them. But I think it goes deeper than that. It's, in a way, the connection is because in Israel, because it's national service, every single child eventually goes into the army. And therefore, as a nation, you realize this is not something, we can just sort of forget about. So you have, young men and women who are going to become lawyers, doctors, farmers, whoever they are, also have to become soldiers as well. It's kind of part of my nephew has just finished his time in the Israeli army. He's going into a career, in a different area, but he would always have that time as a soldier in the IDF, and that's what every single person in Israel has to go through. So you can't get away from it. It's part of the psyche of being an Israeli.
What difference do you think it has for young, religious Jews who are religious Zionists who are serving in the IDF today? What extra motivation do they have, knowing that they are defending the one and only Jewish state in fulfillment of biblical prophecy?
I mean, look, speaking to my nephew, speaking to others who served in the IDF, and part of, obviously, what is a beautiful thing, what Mizrachi UK is doing, and many Mizrachis around the world are doing, is we're bringing shlichim, as was said in the video. We're bringing young rabbinic couples to the diaspora, to communities in Canada, South Africa, and Australia, and of course in the UK. And the people we have in the UK, all of them have served in the IDF. And they tell stories of, when they're sitting in a house in Gaza and fearing for their life. They can relate to the message that Gideon gave to his soldiers on the eve of the battle, or that King David gave to his soldiers. I'm understanding it's the same land. Like the battles we're fighting today in the 21st century, our forefathers fought 2,000-3,000 years ago. So I think they very much feel this sense of they are fighting, Milchemet Hashem, the wars of God, in order to defend their land from its enemies and to live in peace and prosperity and to help the world. I mean, one of the things that I think people don't realize about Israel is it is transforming the globe in terms of its technologies and so on and so forth. So a safe and secure Israel is good for the world, not just good for the Jews.
Absolutely, can agree more with that one. And Andrew, I suppose the next one is from a day of real sombre, and being in Israel for Yom HaZikaron and seeing the TV, you see all the names of the fallen soldiers, and also those who have been murdered in terrorist attacks ever since the re-establishment of the State of Israel. But this follows by a remarkable day, which is Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Independence Day. What does Independence Day mean for Israel in light of the fact that this independence occurred only 3 years after the darkest chapter in Jewish history? And Israel then had to fight a war of independence against 5 Arab armies, and she wasn't equipped or really prepared to actually fight that war, but Israel won nevertheless. What does that say about the God of Israel?
I mean, if you look at the history of that period, that very difficult period, I mean, Ben-Gurion was being advised by everybody, the Americans and the British, to not declare. In fact, there was an embargo placed upon Israel by the Americans back then, who said they would not support them militarily in the fight against the 5 Arab armies. Israel was meant to be a stillborn. There was no way that Israel, with no army, no air force, I think only half the soldiers had guns in the Israeli army in 48. It wasn't really an army, it was just a ragtag bunch of people who'd come together to fight for their survival. And I think those people who fought then, and I've spoken to some of them, and many have passed away, who said to me they weren't just fighting for their survival of themselves, they realized they were fighting for the survival of the Jewish people. And I met one person, he passed away a few years ago, who said he was liberated from Auschwitz, and he fought in the 48 war. He says to be part of the greatest tragedy of Jewish history, and at the same time the greatest triumph of Jewish history in the space of 3 years. And, we opened the Ark together on Yom Ha'atzmaut a few years ago in Hendon United Synagogue. And I just thought I was standing next to an absolute giant of a man. And that's why on Yom Ha'atzmaut, the religious Zionist community, we say Hallel. Hallel is the prayer of thanksgiving we say on all the major festivals, on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and obviously on and Rosh Chodesh every month. And we also say on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And when we come to a line in the Hallel, which is we say, Zeh hayom asah Hashem nagila v'nismechava. This is the day that Hashem has made. We thank and we sing his praises. When I say that line on Yom Ha'atzmaut, I say it with such intent because I really truly believe, as does the whole religious Zionist world, that this was a miracle. That what God has done for us, it's the most unbelievable gift he's given us back, the land of Israel, after 2,000 years. And therefore, that day, Yom Ha'atzmaut is huge celebration, both in Israel and in diaspora. In fact, here in the UK, B'nai Akiva, which is the religious Zionist youth movement, holds a massive event at Kinloss in London. It's packed. Thousands of people come. And Chazan Johnny Turgel's beautiful voice, he leads, raises the roof because people really feel this incredible sense of gratitude to God for what he has done, but also a sense of wonder and just unbelievable sense of destiny. How could it be that we've returned after 2,000 years? I mean, people prayed for 1,000 years and never saw it, and we merit to be in a generation where Israel is once again.
Let's have a look now at this remarkable and inspiring video produced by World Mizrahi that looks at the miracles behind Israel's independence, particularly as Israel last year celebrated her 70th anniversary as a nation reborn.
This year we celebrate 70 years to the reestablishment of our beloved country, Israel. 70 years is monumental, for a man's days are 70 years on earth. For the first time in 2,000 years, a Jew could be born in the land of Israel, live a full life, die in the land of Israel, free, never knowing the exile. This year we celebrate 1948. 1,948 years ago, the Roman Empire destroyed our lives. They burned and demolished our temple and exiled the Jews from Jerusalem, all while gloating their vicious imperial conquest and victory. The Jews rebelled and fought valiantly for their freedom. The rebellion was crushed, and the Jewish people found themselves homeless, helpless, and lost for centuries upon centuries. The long and bitter Jewish exile reached the darkest time in human history. As we celebrate 70 years, we must remember where we were only 74 years ago. And I saw a great open space with dry bones. Can these bones live? Only you know. After the UN voted in favor of the partition plan on May 14, 1948, the 5th of Iyar, the British mandate was due to expire. The year was fraught with countless dangers, escalating Arab violence across the land of Israel, combined with threats of annihilation from every bordering country. American President Harry Truman, in a power play against Russia, began to pressure the United Nations to reject the partition plan and snuff out Israel's hope for independence. The generals of the Haganah and Palmach stood together opposing Ben-Gurion's plan to declare a state. On May 13th, the eve of the Declaration of Independence, General George Marshall, then Secretary of State of the United States, sent Ben-Gurion a brutal ultimatum, demanding the postponement of the Declaration of Independence. Marshall, together with the Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, imposed a military embargo. They threatened that Ben-Gurion's Declaration of Independence would trigger a regional war, which would doom the Jewish people to a second Holocaust in less than 10 years. And the United States would not provide any assistance to the Jews. Intel arrived that Britain had supplied arms to Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq, preparing them for the attack. The Palmach force of the Haganah numbered only 300. They had almost no equipment and no uniforms. Only half the men in each unit had guns. All of the freedom fighters of Israel, the Haganah, Etzel, and Lehi, together numbered only a few thousand. On the eve of the declaration, Israel's army was ill-equipped, unorganized, with no tanks, no real air force, and no battle plan, against 5 professional armies, trained and funded by the British. How could the Jews defend themselves? Standing alone against Israel's top military and political ranks, betrayed, isolated, and threatened by the international community, including the United States, with Arab armies invading from every front, it was now or maybe never.
Under extraordinary pressure, a self-proclaimed secular Zionist, David Ben-Gurion, was overcome, possessed with a ruach gvura, a courageous spirit of biblical proportions.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו והתגדלנו והגענו לזמן הזה.
And just like that, 2,000 years of exile came to an end. 1,948 years ago, Jerusalem was destroyed. We are celebrating the most legendary comeback story in human history. Can these bones live? Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. Thus says the Lord Hashem, I'm going to open your graves and lift you out of your graves, my people, and bring you to the land of Israel. From dry bones and ashes, total despair and desperation, Israel was resurrected from the dead, and new life was breathed into the Jewish people. "70 years ago, there were 600,000 Jews in Israel. Today, there are over 6.5 million from over 100 countries. In 70 years, Israel went from having one asphalt road to building Ben-Gurion International Airport, some of the best hospitals in the world, and built more roads and infrastructure per capita and faster than any other place on the planet. Israel has transformed a barren, desolate, non-productive land into one of the most powerful economies in the world. There are more Torah institutions and more Jewish learning in the land of Israel than any other time in Jewish history. From a group of underground and underarmed freedom fighters, the IDF has emerged as one of the most respected militaries in the world."
The number 70 is represented in Hebrew by the letter Ayin, which also means eye. For 1,948 years, the Jewish people have been praying, V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha leTzion. May our eyes see your return to Zion. We're not praying that one day we hope to see your return to Zion. Let our eyes see that it's already happening right now.
And there can be no doubt that the rebirth of the State of Israel back on the 14th of May 1948 was the biggest miracle in the modern era, and we are truly living in biblical times. These are exciting times that we're living in, Andrew, and just watching that video, I found it absolutely inspirational, that tells the remarkable miracle that is today the modern State of Israel. But in terms of Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, what does it mean for Israel and world Jewry, the fact that all of Jerusalem is back under Israeli sovereignty after that incredible war of June 1967, known as the Six-Day War?
I think the way I describe it is in 1948 we got back our body, but in 67 we got back our soul. Because even though in 48 we had Israel, the fact we couldn't go to the Kotel, the fact we couldn't pray at the holiest site of the Jewish religion, that people could just look at it over the sort of barbed wire of the Jordanian snipers, it was not something that was ideal. And what was even more remarkable was when 67 happened, we never expected to get back Jerusalem. It was simply a defensive war to stop the Egyptian army from approaching and causing destruction, what Nasser had been saying. And in fact, the Israeli government said to Jordan, just stay out of it. We're not having a fight with you. We've got to deal with the Syrian and Egyptian threats. But I guess, thankfully, King Hussein felt, this is a chance to get in with a fight and get rid of Israel, whatever. And he joined the armies of Egypt and Syria. And Israel, of course, had to defend themselves. And by defending themselves, they recaptured Jerusalem. And I think, to me, that line said by Rav Goren, the chief rabbi of Israel, before he blew the shofar, saying in 1967, HaKotel b'yadenu, which means the kotel is in our hands. I think for Jews around the world, that was just remarkable to return to Yerushalayim, to return to the Jewish people's heart and soul is just, to me, it was not, Yom Ha'atzmaut is a great miracle, but in many ways, return to Jerusalem was an even greater one, because that is where, the temple was, that is where the Jewish people thrived, and today there are more Jews learning in Jerusalem than any time in our history. It's a remarkable city.
Absolutely, and very, very special city, Jerusalem. But I have to ask you, I mean, the fact that you're on this programme, Andrew, really signifies the incredible friendship that's been developed between the evangelical Christian community and the Jewish community and the State of Israel. Mm-hmm. So in light of everything that we've seen through this programme we've discussed today, and the fact that we are clearly living in biblical times, what role can Christians play with standing by Israel and the Jewish community?
And I think we are very grateful for that support. I think for us, as supporters of Israel and obviously as Jewish people, a lot of people out there are not supporters. And the hypocrisy and the double standards we see in United Nations and the daily sort of biased reports we see in the media, which seem to condemn Israel for defending itself. I always try to think if any other nation had missiles being flung at it and didn't defend itself, we'd think they were crazy. Yet when Israel does it, they are somehow doing wrong. But I think for us, the support, both in terms of financially, tourism, and just in the world of social media, of supporting the right of Israel to exist and to thrive, and to also be a light to the nations. As I said, to me, the fact that many of the technologies we use today, I mean, I got here today using Waze, an Israeli creation. I have a snack in the car which are cherry tomatoes, an Israeli invention. So much of the pharmaceutical industry now and the technology used in that comes from Israel, and even so much of the drip irrigation that is saving lives in Africa and India and across the world also was developed in Israel. So we have to realise, and I think the evangelical Christian community does realise that Israel is a blessing to the world. And the more they can support, one of the things actually, we created a show called Dreams of a Nation, which we want to tell the story of this miraculous story of the Jewish people from Abraham in the Bible to the modern day miracles we are currently living. We perform this to Jewish communities around the world. And in fact, I've been told we should definitely perform this to evangelical communities who also feel a sense of connection to that story, which is something we're obviously exploring as well. But I mean, to me, there's a relationship there that hopefully can blossom and help all people who believe in God and believe in a just sort of a peace and a sense of the world coming to some sort of fruition and conclusion in a spiritual and moral way.
Absolutely. And in terms of the times we're living in, we are, with 2 minutes left of the programme to go, Andrew, that we are living in biblical times, but we're also living in dangerous and dark times as well. How can Christians, as well as the Jewish community and also the nation of Israel, look back at Israel's past 71 years as a nation reborn, and particularly as we look in only 3 years prior to that, and we see the darkest chapter of Jewish history, to know that Israel today is a military, economic superpower in the Middle East, and is a light unto the nations right across the Middle East, is a beacon of light. So in light of the erosion of kind of moral values, how important is it that we look at how God has fulfilled his word through the likes of Isaiah, Jeremiah and the prophets, and that we are seeing that fulfilled in our day? How significant is that, and what can we expect?
I think you're right. I think for us as the Jewish people, I'm not sure if it's the same in the Christian world, we're seeing a kind of a tower bridge situation in our people. There has never been more Jewish learning, more Jewish observance, more commitment, and of course Israel has allowed that to sort of grow and blossom in a most remarkable way. But at the same time, there's never been more confusion, more assimilation, more apathy amongst the Jewish people. And to my mind, I believe, Mizrachi believes, the way we can reverse that is by using the power of Israel, by using the power of the story of Israel in modern times to really show people, you know, you're part of a nation that has this remarkable story going back thousands of years that has been, as you said, has been reborn in the modern era. And therefore, to remind people when they've got a sense of mission, a sense of purpose, a sense of you know, inspiration that they can connect to, I think that's what brings people back to God and back to sort of a life of morality and of connection to community and connection to family, connection to God. We believe passionately in it. We see God as blessed us in the last 71 years. Israel is that light, and we hope that everyone can see that.
And Rabbi Andrew Shaw, absolute pleasure to have you on today's Middle East Report. It's been very educational. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. We can clearly see that the rebirth of the nation of Israel is a modern miracle, which says that we are living in exciting and biblical times. So we can prove that God is on the move when we look at the developments taking place in Israel and the Jewish communities around the world. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report. And I'll leave you with this beautiful song that reflects the glory that is Jerusalem.
אוויר הרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים נישא ורוח הארבעים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן ואבן שבויה וחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור לקשור כתרים קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים כשמך צורבת השפתיים כמשיקת שרף אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור